scroll through करते हैं ना, तो this is Raman करेंगे. We are on the title page right now. Okay. So let's start. Good morning and good evening, friends, based on where you are. Uh, I'm going to talk about um, my understanding of Four Noble Truths. I think it is important to set the context here a little bit because otherwise there may be an expectation mismatch. Um, what I'm trying to do today is simply share what I have understood of the Four Noble Truths. And I have taken the liberty to use examples from my own life uh, that I actually used to then make myself understand how it applies and how it has to some extent changed my thoughts and my behavior. So this may be very different than what you might be expecting or what a typical session on Noble Truths might be. I hope you find it useful to some extent. With that, Deepak, first slide. कर दो, मैं भी देख लूँ. फुल स्क्रीन क्या? फुल स्क्रीन हो सकता है क्या? ठीक. Okay. So the first time I read about Buddha's teachings was perhaps sometime in the junior classes, a brief reference to Buddha's teachings in the NCRT history book. And even while it was great to see it, I don't think it hit me at that time what those teachings meant. About a year or so ago, when we started these sessions with Professor Dhar, this was one of the first sessions that we had around the Four Noble Truths. And suddenly something hit me. The way the Four Noble Truths are structured, and then subsequently when I referred to some description on Wikipedia and other sources, it occurred to me that the structure of the Four Noble Truths is amazingly similar to how, for example, the modern day science today approaches various diseases. So for example, what you see here is a snapshot of a journal from American Academy of Neurology talking about the Parkinson's disease. The keywords that you see here are diagnosis, prognosis, treatment, and symptoms. And this is perhaps typical of any modern day medical journal. So every disease that a scientist would like to talk about would usually contain of these four segments. What are the symptoms, based on which what is the identified disease, so that's symptoms and diagnosis. What causes that disease, what is the origin of that disease, because that then helps you to go further and say, can this disease be cured or not cured, and that's prognosis. And finally, once there's a prognosis, you actually start to think about how is the disease treated, so the treatment. So it's a very sort of a rational, logical, modern way of looking at diseases. But what was so amazing is this is exactly how Buddha, the great scientific mind, thousands of years ago, looked at perhaps the biggest disease or the biggest problem or the biggest sorrow of our lives, called dukkha. So if you see, there is actually a fairly good mapping of how modern scientists look at diseases today and how Buddha looked at dukkha thousands of years ago. The symptoms and the diagnosis, and he talks about that in the first Noble Truth, and we shall see that in the next slide. But in general, the first truth talks about there being existence of Buddha. Of dukkha, the general dissatisfaction in life. And then he talks about the origin of dukkha, relates it to craving. So that's the cause. Thirdly, the prognosis of dukkha, the fact that dukkha can be overcome, cessation of dukkha. And finally, the way or the path to cessation, the treatment. And that's the Eightfold Path. So it's sort of in some sense completely overlapping with how any disease can be analyzed and hopefully cured. Next slide. So moving over to the first noble truth, Deepak, can you just check if the voice is still going there? This will be good. I don't want them to miss it. It's still going? Okay, great. And so in the first noble truth, we learn about the fact that irrespective of whose life, what form of life, what kind of life, where you are born, which culture, which age, there is always some or the other form of dukkha. And dukkha doesn't just mean perhaps pain or misery, it means a general dissatisfaction. Even when you are perhaps in the so-called happiest phases of your life, there is still some dissatisfaction. There may be the fear of that happiness going away. There is dukkha associated with birth and with death. There is dukkha associated with aging. There is dukkha when you unite with something unpleasant, and there is dukkha when you are separated from something that you didn't want to get separated from. And so if you think about it for a moment, it's very hard to think or claim that there was a period in your life which was completely blissful, which had no dukkha or no dissatisfaction at all. At least for us lesser mortals, that would be the case. Now, in its basic form, the truth seems very, very simple, right? Very straightforward, very easy to understand. But for me, this was perhaps the most profound statement of the four very profound statements. And this was one lesson that actually, when I started to think about, shook me up a little bit. And this is where I started to think about my own life's experiences. There were things in my life that happened when I was fairly young. I lost my father, and suddenly the world around me changed. I suddenly saw people changing around me, behaving in a manner that I did not expect them to behave. I saw a lot of things that I had never seen before or never expected before. And that led to a lot of resentment and bitterness in me. Some of it continues to stay in my attitude and my subconsciousness even today. But what I realized, which I perhaps didn't realize for many years, was it kept bothering me, and I kept asking myself, why did this happen to me? And why is this world such where people behave in a manner that you don't expect them to behave? Why would things happen to you when you think other people are perfectly happy? And I think after many years, I perhaps found an answer in this truth, which is, it is perhaps fundamentally wrong to expect that life will be entirely fair and smooth and happy. Who guaranteed you or who promised you that there will be no dukkha in the world? In fact, as the truth says, there will always be dukkha around you. Or at least that's how I understand it. And that led very naturally to then the second thought, which is, so if the dukkha is going to be around, you are not going to find peace or satisfaction or happiness by trying to take it away or by thinking about why it happens or why it's you that it happens with. The only way to get around or to actually escape it is to start to not expect that dukkha would not be there. And so if you look at the second truth, to some extent, the flow is actually very logical. The origin of dukkha is in the craving, and the craving is essentially for the dukkha to be not there. So it's kind of Very simple and self-explanatory when you start to think about it, yet very profound. And so if you try and stay away from expectations of only good things happening to you, and whatever definition you might have of that good thing, right? It could be about things that are pleasing to your senses. It could be about material gains. It could even be about spiritual gains. Anything that you try and cling to, anything that you expect should happen to you, will eventually perhaps cause you more dukkha.
Can you elaborate on the second dukkha again?
Yeah. So, what I have come to think or realize is that the origin of dukkha is indeed in this strong desire to avoid dukkha. So it's sort of a strange kind of a thing. If dukkha is general dissatisfaction, then you will stay dissatisfied as long as you don't want to stay dissatisfied. Okay, anything that you want to get or you want to change in your life, and you want to question as to why something not so happy or not so satisfying is happening to you or to people around you, there will be dissatisfaction. Now, this is not to suggest, therefore, you should let go everything and not take any action. It's something that we have debated and discussed, and we can talk a little bit more later. This is to say that to some extent you have to look at your expectations in life and say, why should you take anything for granted? Why should anything good or anything satisfying should happen in your life? Can you work towards better things? Certainly. But should you work towards them with an expectation that good things or satisfying things should happen to you or to people around you or to people you care for? As soon as you start to expect, there will be dukkha. Or there will always be dukkha, but you will be more affected by that dukkha. That's basically what I'm trying to say here. Okay, and I don't think this is sort of obvious. I mean, this is fairly obvious, right? In some sense, if you look at the often cited Gita Sar, it's not very different from this, right? You do your duty, you do your work, but without expectation. Phal ki ichha mat karo. To some extent, these messages somewhere are linked. Okay. Third noble truth. And so from the second thought, the third thought flows very logically, which is, if the cause or the origin of dukkha is in clinging to certain things or thoughts or aspirations or feelings, then the cessation of dukkha has to be in taking that clinging away. If you stop expecting or clinging to things, then irrespective of what happens around those thoughts and things, it cannot affect you, or to a large extent it will not affect you. And that is, in my opinion, what is cessation of dukkha. Now, this can happen at a micro level and this can happen at a macro level. So there is perhaps, it's very hard to define what is an absolute cessation of dukkha, because there will be so many manifestations of dukkha around you that for one to claim that you've actually succeeded in cessation of dukkha, at least for people like us, it's going to be extremely hard. But you can see the manifestation of this in very many small things that happen in your life. And so every time you believe you are disturbed, okay, you should introspect and start to ask yourself, why am I disturbed? And keep asking that question till you get to the root cause. And once you think you got to the root cause, what I have found very effective in sort of my own thinking is, ask yourself this question, why did I expect that this particular thing should not happen in this particular manner? And in many cases, that has allowed me to come out of that problem or that sort of vicious circle of thoughts. So this is how I have found applying. I mean, I don't know whether this is the correct understanding or not, but I have found this very useful in sort of handling day-to-day life stresses, but more than that, this has allowed me to be at peace with myself and with my background and what I have done and what I want to do. Okay. Finally, the fourth noble truth, the path to cessation of dukkha. Now, as I said, for me, the first truth was probably the most thought provoking and the most shaking. And the second and the third truth came very logically from there. I struggled a little bit with the fourth truth. The first three, they were so sort of adjacent that applying them, or sort of they automatically got applied every time I started to use this framework. The fourth one, I had to think more consciously and say, as soon as I start to realize that I'm clinging to something and I try to uncling, consciously or unconsciously, I start to become more aware of dukkha and be less affected by it. So, what is this path to cessation of dukkha? Am I not already following the path? So, I had to think a lot more about how does this actually apply. And I don't think I still have a complete answer to my own satisfaction. But what is very clear is if you look at the eight constituents of this path, and I don't think there is any particular order, and a lot of literature actually talks about it the same way, which is these are not meant to be in some kind of a sort of a cause effect relationship where one will lead to the other. This is almost like you have to practice these together. Some perhaps are more intrinsic, others more dependent on the former, but these are not as if right view will lead to the right intention, which will further lead to the right speech. I think these are all to be, in some sense, practiced together, not in any particular order. What is very obvious is, commonsensically, if you don't follow these, chances are there will be more dukkha. So, for example, if you don't follow right speech or right action, you are likely to hurt someone. And when you hurt someone, either the person will react or not react. If the person reacts, you will be hurt as well. There will be dukkha. You will start to think about what that person said or reacted. If the person does not react, your own conscience will then actually start to prick you as to why you said something or acted in some way. So eventually, by not following the right path, the right speech, the right action, there will be more dukkha. To fully appreciate and understand this path, I think we will obviously have to follow the path to a level where we realize the difference between where we are today and where we could be. And I don't think I'm in a position to comment on that too much. But commonsensically, it does seem many of these things will lead you to a life where perhaps dukkha around you doesn't matter. That was sort of my limited understanding of this fourth truth. Next slide, please. And then from there, actually, I took the liberty of going beyond the four truths and mentioned here a little bit about something that I have heard a lot from Professor Dhar, especially in the initial sessions, which refers to this excellent book titled Don't Take Your Life Personally, and this whole concept of self. Now, the reason I identify so much with this is because this is perhaps one area where I have seen a lot of my own thoughts change, and it's very hard for me to change my thoughts. I mean, people who know me know that um, I can be um, I can be very strong-headed. I can argue and debate for days and days to defend my perspective. And so for me, as I saw myself changing my thoughts, it was an amazing actually experience. If I look at some of the vices, the so-called vices in life, I have always believed that when it comes to greed, jealousy, attachment and lust, I consider these as vices. And these are again based on common understanding of what we've seen, heard, observed, taught, etc. And then there's also another vice called pride. For whatever reason, maybe the way I was brought up, the way I observed things around me, I actually was never sure if pride was a vice. I always, in some sense, thought that pride was a virtue, because it meant that you believed in your own self, you had confidence in what you believe in, what you thought, and what you acted on. And so for me, pride was actually a matter of pride. I always felt I was proud, but I always felt that was because I was good, I was virtuous, and because I always felt that I had very good control over some of the other vices that I actually considered vices, which is greed. I certainly felt all my life that I wasn't greedy. I certainly felt all my life, and I actually felt proud of the fact that I would not get jealous easily. Even while I did pursue material gains, I always felt that I never had material attachment. I I sort of thought that, I never felt bad on losing something material. I did have attachment with my family, but I never had material attachment. And so I felt very good about it. And I thought I had very good control over lust as well. But what I perhaps was not very happy about was my ability to overcome my anger. And in fact, as some of the friends here know, this was one amongst many reasons why I started attending these sessions and started to take interest in this whole concept of Buddha's teachings and Vipassana meditation, etc. I wanted to overcome anger. I don't think I have succeeded in doing so yet, but I can clearly see I've made some progress. But what I ended up achieving was something that I did not start with. I think I ended up changing my thought process about these virtues and these vices to a large degree. And that's what I've tried to represent in the next slide. And this has, again, as I said, shaken my belief system up a little bit. What I considered as a virtue is something that I now realize is perhaps one of the roots of vices. The identification with self, the feeling that I am something and that I am proud of it, is actually not only a vice. The more I think about it, now I realize is actually a root cause for many other vices. And it's fairly obvious to see, when you start to think about it for a minute. When you are proud, when you are very aware of the fact, or you at least think that you are, great in many aspects and you take pride in that, every time someone points out that you are not, there will be anger. Okay. You may realize it consciously or you may not, but that pride will lead you to anger. Someone may criticize you justifiably or even unjustifiably, but what brings anger in you is not that criticism. It is actually the difference between what that person is saying and your self impression or self image of yourself that comes from pride. So pride leads to anger, is what I've realized. And that's why perhaps I have struggled with anger so much all my life, because I was very proud. Pride can lead to greed and attachment. The notion that you are something, and therefore, as an extension to your own personality, you have either things or people that you will cling to. If you let go the notion of your own self, if you stop to take yourself seriously or personally, the attachment will automatically go away. Because when there is no self, there cannot be other things attached to that self. And to some extent, greed and jealousy are also an extension of pride. You are proud that you are good or better than many others in various aspects of life. And so you take pride in that. And that pride builds on itself. And then something or someone comes in front of you and you suddenly realize, without anyone telling you, that that person or that thing is better than you in some aspect that you always thought you were really good at. And so that will lead to jealousy. That jealousy may trigger you to actually try and become better than that person or that thing in that aspect. And that can lead to greed. So the more I think about it, the more I'm realizing what I considered all my life as a virtue may not be a virtue. It may actually be the root cause of all the vices. And so this whole notion of is there a self versus don't take your life personally. Move away from the notion of I and things around me will perhaps lead you away from many of these vices, will allow you to follow to some extent the eightfold path that Buddha talks about, and hopefully allows you to overcome dukkha. My sort of views on lust, they somewhat remain ambiguous even today. I could not, in the brief thinking that I did on this topic of how pride leads to other things, I could not correlate as to what effect pride may have on the vice called lust. So I left that piece on the corner. So this is obviously work in progress. I keep thinking about it, and I'm sure you guys have a lot of thoughts on this. But these are the thoughts that I thought I'll share with you. I don't know how how much justice I have done to the original purpose of this session, but I just said what I wanted to say. Thank you. Thanks a lot for your time and patience.
Good. This 8 by 9, there's one more slide?
No, sir, I think this is the last one.
Last. यहाँ तक 8 by 9 लिखा हुआ है तो मुझे दिख रहा है ठीक से.
Bring it down, I think.
I think by now most people would have anyway left, would have given up.
I think there is some problem.
So we can ask Sudhakar and others if they want. And of course, all the people here, if you have questions and comments, and we can discuss it. Firstly, compliment Raman. Good, very good. So always good to have make a presentation which is based on our experience rather than on our cerebral thinking.
Sudhakar has said great presentation.
So you can ask any questions if you have. Sudhakar.
Any questions you can,
type it. Meanwhile, if you people
or you can speak also to enable the audio rights.
May I ask? You spoke about not having expectation. You are actually not having expectations, which is I agree with it to some extent that the baggage of expectation later leads to dukkha. But I have always kind of tried to think in this manner that expectation, like if you talk about ideals, honesty, XYZ ideals, which we all have like as a we want to follow somewhere in our radar we have it. So if we don't have expectation, how can we have ideals? And if we don't follow ideals, we say like no expectations, no ideals. So just keep doing our actions. So somewhere should we also like kind of have ideals and expect that ideals should be fulfilled. I mean, I always felt that I kind of like when I have ideals and I don't see people kind of like meeting those ideals, I get personally very angry. I had anger issues related to this self-righteous, like if you can call that. So I mean, any comments?
Sure. Actually, this is a question I've kept asking for many years, and finally, I think I have got some answers, primarily from Professor Dhar, but then also from introspecting and reading and discussing. Not having expectations is not the same as being passive or being inactive or not acting or not wanting to change either yourself or things and people around you. That's not what not having expectation means. In fact, we've had very heated debates amongst the four of us where I've often, because I anyway had always anger issues, accused them of hiding behind this principle to not act. Okay.
Yeah.
So I've had very similar issues to yours, which is I would set myself a moral standard and then expect people to follow that, and when they don't, I feel angry about it. what I've come to realize is, I think in Sir's words, do whatever you want to do towards, if you think that's the right thing or right goal to achieve, do whatever you think is right. However, that action should not be prompted from anger or from any kind of a negative feeling. It should come from only one positive feeling to make an impact, a positive change. So it should be out of compassion, not out of anger. So if I want to hold you to a virtue, it should not be that I am sitting on a pedestal looking down at you and saying, you are a lowly person, I need to elevate you. Because the origin of that action is then not correct. It's not coming from compassion. It should come from a very humble way of sort of thinking, this is the right thing to do, therefore I shall do it. And so, I mean, I don't know whether I'm explaining this, but there is a difference between setting goals and doing them, yet detaching yourself completely from the expectation of it getting fulfilled. And this is where I keep saying this is very close to what Gita has always said. And it's sort of almost now a cliche, right? Everyone says, Karm karo, phal ki chinta mat karo. But in my opinion, this is the meaning of that sar of Gita. It actually tells you to do things and do it the way you think is right for the right cause. But the expectation of the result, and the result may not necessarily be from a very selfish perspective. You may be doing it for others, for the society, but you should still not have an expectation that things will be how you want them to be. Who told you? As I said, the first noble truth was actually in that sense very, very disturbing for me, which is the question which says, why did you think things should happen the way you think they should? Who guaranteed that? No one. So you should never let that affect you. You should do what you think is right. You should strive for the right virtues, the right goals. But if things don't happen the way you want them to be or you think they should be, it's all right. That should not bother you.
Yeah, I think to answer my question, basically, like, that is like a revelation to me, that it's the positive thought process that, or the right belief also guided by the positive thought that should be leading me towards action. I mean, I can very well like relate to this, that sitting on top and then making a judgment on others, and why didn't you like you're lesser? I mean, yeah, it answers my
And
question.
secondly, I think the fact that the success, if I may use that word loosely, is in the action, not in the result. If you are convinced that you did everything you could towards a right cause, you've done your job.
I just read one line. The outcome of an action is not entirely dependent on me. You always need to be cognizant of it. The expectation arises that I have done so much effort, it should result into this thing. Whether it be a physical effort or whether it be an effort at society or even family. Because that's basically from that understanding of self. I am and therefore I have done it, therefore this should happen. From the logical point of view, it may seem, but we forget that any consequence of my action is going to depend on so many things around. So many people, so many situations, so many surroundings, so much effect, so much, even things like weather may affect the outcome of the result. So we should be cognizant of it. It's a hard fact, isn't it? So once we are cognizant of it, then our expectations come down. Because we expect certain action will produce a certain output. It happens in a robotic system, also failures can happen, but in a human system, with different people having different dispositions, we cannot predict how a person will respond to even a very noble lead from my side. Because he or she may look at it in a different manner.
So I found a little, sorry, this is exactly what I tried to do, but as I observe my own behavior and others, this is that little problem and dilemma, which is as soon as you start to attribute the result to a number of things, there is a tendency to therefore then not try enough and try a little bit and then say results are beyond my control. So that is one part which is then therefore sometimes leading to inaction or not enough action. And so I think there is a little precaution to be taken in this, which is keep asking yourself, have I tried everything that I could? That is, I think, also an.
You see, if we are observant of ourselves, we'll ourselves realize that okay, this is my contribution to the failure. If I am dispassionately evaluating the outcome at every moment, then we can easily see, oh, this is my contribution to the failure of the whole process. That I didn't put in effort. I didn't, even if I am a advisor or a manager, I didn't put in effort in motivating people to work. That's why. If my team has not produced the output, I can't blame the team entirely for it. I didn't probably motivate them enough. I didn't set a good example, or I didn't push them enough, or pull them enough, whichever way. So that needs, the key thing is to observe the things dispassionately. If we can observe dispassionately, then we can figure it
Just to add to what you were saying, we said that you could attribute success to whether you have tried your best and not to the outcome. But mostly, at least I have found that what happens is, especially if your mind is very chatterbox, you will never lead to a conclusion. At least I will never. Some people who have strong willpower, you may lead to the fact that you have tried enough. I will I will always lead to the point that I have not tried enough. I could have done this because of my, you know, you know lack of will or whatever willpower. I have not tried enough. So whenever at least I think I will always try to blame myself that I have not tried enough.
But why blame? If you realize that there is something you could have done, then go ahead and do it. Then why get into that blame game? If you suddenly realize there is something you could have done, you haven't done, go ahead.
in that, I have seen, if I recall from our experiences of major events, which were major activities which we have done in our professional life, many a times one has to balance the domestic, the personal, the other aspects with the profession. And when we think, when we take the things too personally, we can create a situation where it may disturb the balance and eventually become counterproductive in the long run. So it actually is a question of experience, slowly and slowly as we experience things. So we sometimes overdo things, sometimes we underdo things, and then slowly and slowly we come to an equilibrium. Because to be able to strike exactly, the perfectionist tendencies can be very harmful. And tendency not to take it seriously can also be equally harmful. So one has to strike a balance. Perfectionism usually is a it has its roots in ego, in the notion of I am, and what I do should be perfect, and inability to therefore be flexible and allow things. Okay, I want it this way, somebody else wants it this way. Is it really causing a lot of harm in the process? If not, fine. So that kind of a readjustment flexibility comes from reduction in ego. And I have seen as we try to get less and less into that mode, the natural flexibility improves. So we move from perfection to what's called optimal. There's a difference between that. The best to what is optimal. Optimum meaning subject to constraints. So things may not be the best. There may be something much better that may be possible, but that may not be feasible under the constraints. So we have to respect those constraints.
So Krishna will share with
This ideal or a question by which I want to say something, which is so. This is a question which again it is very difficult for me. It is very difficult for me to speak from my experience. So I have this habit of, even though it is from my experience or understanding, I will speak of it in very sort of generalizations and as principles, and that's the problem I have to overcome. But I understand this question very well. Is that if you have to set up ideals, honesty, or whatever ideals you have, at some level there is a problem in setting up because if you say there is it is something that is not there today, so I have to be honest or I have to be something if I am not, let us say. So there is a difference between what is and what should be, and the moment there is a difference between what is and what should be, that is the root of the problem. If, for example, if I don't have money, I need money may lead to a problem, but then the same applies to a noble goal also. And so that is the problem, right? And so one of the things that I intellectually understand is that that is why you can't set up ideals as something of an expectation from you on which you act. Rather, an ideal has to be presented to, and I'll speak this more in context of maybe young kids, or I think we are probably beyond repair in that sense. But for young kids, if you sort of convert ideal into duty not in the sort of a, oh you have to do this, it's like one next small step that I take without knowing why. It's just because I do it. So it's like when you say Sheil as 5 principles, you say you just, these are basic things you do. So if you don't set it up as I have to get there from here, you just say I do this, that will lead to the ideal. So the goal that you have to, I mean, that's my understanding. The
I
goal.
just think like being in thinking beings. Sometimes we do question our actions. We question our wrong actions, so we may also ponder on our right actions.
Yes.
In that sense. So I mean, just doing it out of a sense of duty after a point of time. I mean,
After a point of time doesn't work, but initially, and that is why I think there is some reason why I used to say बच्चों में संस्कार होने चाहिए, which is sort of habit in a good way. Habit otherwise is not good, but habit which will lead to ideals automatically, rather than saying it's a difference between what is and what should be, and then which leads to problems. I don't know, I'm not able to
No, I got you.
articulate it, but
So like basic minimum to begin with, like in form of action.
or rather I would say action without reason. Because if you do an action towards a goal, that is the problem. The basic problem is that you are acting purposefully to achieve something which will attach it to the result. And so there is a possibility of an action without, with no result in it. You just act, but you will say why will you then act? You will immediately ask an intellectual question of why will you act. But then that is the thing to realize, that if you I can act without reason, then that is the right action in some way. It's a very contradictory.
It's interesting what you're saying.
Yeah.
This is the part I don't understand.
I'll
Yeah.
tell you, I want to give an example.
And the way I have tried to explain this to myself, and maybe you can help me here. The way I have tried to explain this to myself is, I mean, you guys know I have a bias for action.
Yeah.
I tend to sort of act
Yes.
on things. I always act towards some goal, but what I have discovered is don't cling to that result. But the action is very well thought with a goal in mind. What you are saying though is different. You're saying this is action without any goal. And this is what I intuitively don't understand.
there
I
is a
want
very-
to understand.
Yeah. So I mean, again, I am speaking it again very very intellectually. I am not saying that the action will not lead to a goal. Action will absolutely lead to some change and will lead to some goal. But if you set it up in yourself, like saying I am doing this to achieve this goal, then that causes problem. So then you will say, okay, but then how will I act? And so the answer to that, and it's blasphemous to say this probably in this context, is Ritual in a very different sense. Ritual not in a dogmatic sense of you're doing ritual. Ritual is habit, a good habit. So if you say, I should wake up in the morning, in order to have good health has no meaning. I just wake up in the morning. So that's an action I do. Now if I end up thinking about why I am doing this action, absolutely when I am doing this action, that defeats the whole purpose, because when you're acting in the moment
I-
towards what you are doing.
I see
right?
what you're saying.
Yeah.
The challenge with that is there is some goal
Yes.
in that action, but I don't know what that goal is. Someone else knew about that goal and therefore got me into into the habit of doing it.
You can
The problem
same
with that
thing can
is
happen with you yourself knowing the goal, but then not acting out of that goal when you are actually acting.
the problem with
So, yeah.
the sort of the problem with people like us is we question a lot, and for us to do something without asking why is very hard.
Yes.
So
So I'll give you one example there. So I was actually listening, and I was suddenly when you were saying something, I came across some things in the past. During my teenage time, when I was rebellious, I saw.
oh, you were rebellious also? It doesn't look like you are capable of being rebellious.
So I saw, for example, my Nanaji was very old, and he was, because of the extreme old age and because of all the things that happened in the old age, he was completely unmanageable. He would shout, he would scream, he would use all the filthy language towards my mommy and all, everyone in the family, and still they would come in this rumor and serve him, and will go back and say, yeah, we have to do this. Even though he's saying this, we have to do this because there's no option. Being a teenager, I said, why? Why do you have to do this? If he behaves like this with you, you behave like this and say, आज खाना नहीं मिलेगा, देखते क्या करोगे, आप कहाँ जाओगे? Right? So, and if you apply reason that if he's behaving like this, and my goal is to show him that he's wrong, right? And you put your reasoning into it. If you put your mind into it, then many times mind can fool you, or you can get entangled in too much of reasoning. There are things, as you said, when you do it just because you do it. You don't do it because of a reason. As soon as you do it for a reason कि चलो मुझे उनकी सेवा करनी है, वो भाव एक दिन चला जाएगा जिस दिन उनकी गाली और बढ़ जाएगी. Right?
No, I see what I think you mentioned this before also, and I thought very deeply about it because I have seen similar things in my family also. I think so if you think about it, you're right that mind can fool itself. I mean, who is self? I mean, mind can fool itself. If in hindsight now you were to think, you could, for example, have explained the situation to yourself by saying, this person is not in his right mind. Arguing with him will be counterproductive. He is not doing it deliberately. This is a flow of chemicals in his brain which is causing it. It's not his fault. So I don't have to retaliate in the same way. I know it's much easier to say. It's very hard to do. But you could still set that goal and say, so therefore I am going to behave in a normal manner and not get provoked. Now, the alternative is my father and my grandfather told me as a kid, बड़ों का आदर करना होता है, बड़ों के आगे ऊंचा नहीं बोलना होता है, उनकी हमेशा सेवा करनी है, चाहे तुम्हें उनकी बात पसंद आए या ना आए. So I would keep doing it. The problem with that is I will start to develop a lot of resentment. My sanskars are telling me to serve him.
As politicians say, I am being misquoted. No, but yeah,
Problem with one.
So I don't know that will work.
The problem with the first statement is that if you could, for example, say and try to argue that he's doing this because he's old and you're basically trying to find a reason of why you should do seva to him. Very soon you will find a reason not to do this, because you will say, अभी तो इनका चेकअप कराया था, सब तो ठीक है, कहाँ कोई मेंटल
There will be temptation.
राइट, कहाँ कोई मेंटल
So,
But you can
what if
overcome
somebody is not old?
there is one
What if
background
somebody is not
statement
old?
to be said
There
for
is
the
temptation,
yeah.
but you
Right.
can overcome it.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm telling you this from a very personal
Yeah.
experience.
So let me say one thing. All of what I am saying is irrelevant if you can be aware every moment. See, all this reason to have good habits or follow Sheel. For example, we had this discussion whether Arhans need to follow what does Sheel mean for them, and we said to them it will come naturally. Why will they tell themselves consciously to follow these principles as a habit? Because they don't need to, because they're aware every moment they will not do wrong. So if you are aware every moment and you can reflect every moment, then you are absolutely right. Then you don't need to do all of this. I am talking about a state which is much more
No, I understand
simpler.
that. I
In which
understand
case,
that.
what you do is, it's not because your Bab Dada told you so. It's because if you once have understood it, not because your Bab Dada, then you make it into a good habit. So,
no, I
yes,
understand.
that
But
is
the problem is
Because you have told yourself.
because
you-
yes.
you-
So if
you-
yeah,
Not
this
because somebody
involves
else.
some level
I
of
think there is one very subtle catch in it. The subtle catch, because we also are facing the same thing with respect to her mother, and I've seen how much how much I used to actually fight with her that she should treat her in a different manner. You see, when you have a sanskar or a habit, it's a kind of a automatic reaction which has been a kind of stimulus response behavior which has been set up. मेरे पिताजी हैं, I will behave like this. पिताजी हैं. But when the Pitaji starts shouting and behaving, ill behaving, I will not be able to take it. There will be internal resentment, keep on building. I am true it, करना पड़ रहा है, करना पड़ रहा है. शुरू से तो आदत पड़ी हुई है, फिर कहेंगे करना पड़ रहा है, फिर resentment होगी और वो टूट जाएगा. So what is the proper thing? Firstly, we do realize limitations of reason, but anything unreasonable cannot be done. When you say in this situation also, if you reason thoroughly and deeply, you will be forced to do much more than what you are doing actually. So when we reason and find that my mother-in-law is actually suffering from dementia, it's an old age disease, and this will happen to me also. Just a simple thing. What was Buddha's realization? If you read before he went out of the house, how did he go? Of course, we usually say he saw some people and all. But what is written in the scripture, in the Tipitaka, is that while I was enjoying all this thing, it occurred to me, how long will I keep on chasing these pleasures which are sensory and fleeting, and I am still subject to death, old age, disease. So this very fact that I am subject to old age, death and disease, if you just remember this, which is a hard fact, it doesn't need to be reasoned out. Immediately realize, so he said, this will happen to me also. And immediately the whole world will be changed. And to balance the reason, that's why it is said, to balance the reason, there has to be compassion. Without that, the reason can go totally astray. So when you see somebody suffering, and the mind is even little bit pure, there will be the possibility of arising of compassion. Because as you rightly said, you can reason out both ways. And you can even reason out it may be better to trouble the person and give a proper message and this and that. Well, if you have compassion, you will try it once and see it doesn't work. Then you talk to doctor, he says, no, it won't work. Then you understand, okay, there's no way out of it. This is the way it has to be done. So the problem gets solved when we take all the factors together, not one alone. Reason alone will not satisfy. Compassion alone will also not satisfy. Equanimity has to be there. Those 4 Brahma Viharas, so beautifully put. You have to have loving kindness. You have to have, and it's not that we have to have it. They are all dormant in us. There is a feeling of kindness towards everybody. Generally, we want to be kind to everybody. We feel good about it. We have the ability of being compassionate. When you see anybody suffering, not only our relative, even outside, if you see somebody suffering, there's that feeling, यार कुछ करें, but कर नहीं पाते हैं. That inner urge कि किसी तरह से suffering, चलो कुछ खाने को ही दे दो, कुछ तो दे दो, जो immediate कर सकते, कुछ तो कर दो. So there's that feeling of non-jealousy, the point which he was pointing out. That's innate to us. कोई खुश होता है तो हमारे मन में भी खुशी आती है, फिर suddenly that I arise, अरे यार इसको तो आगे बढ़ गया, then that immediately the other thing, that our happiness on seeing others happy gets overwhelmed by that feeling of jealousy. But to balance all of them is the equanimity, that has to be there. So when you see a person suffer, compassion should not lead to pity and you start suffering.
नहीं मतलब कंपैशन ऐसे एकदम ऊपर से तो वैसे नहीं ना आता
तो practice
अंदर
है,
से माइंड प्यूरिफाई होता
धीरे धीरे साधना करेंगे तभी होगा ना.
So this is the last sentence that you said कि वो practice ही आएगा. So the basic doubt I have is, it is very easy to say that take into account all factors and deeply reason out, and if somebody has the capability to do that, then it is perfectly fine. How do you inculcate that? How do you start? So
For a small child it's fine, but
Yeah,
even
my
you see
cons-
for a
yeah,
small child,
right.
I was very deeply, I've been deeply influenced by that Ambalit Rahul Sutta. You see, small child, 7-year-old child,
Yes.
what does Buddha advise him? Reflect. What should you do? I mean, that's a absolutely marvelous way
Right.
of teaching children. What you should reflect, what you are going to do, whatever action you do, physical, vocal, or mental. You should reflect. Is it for my good? Is it going to harm me? Is it for the good of others? Is it going to harm them?
Right.
Very simple.
Right.
You can tell a small child that, even today.
Right. Can I take it further? So you tell this to a child, right? Now the child has to remember this when he is doing the action.
That's
How will he remember if it is not a practice?
right. Yeah.
If it does not come into habit, not in the wrong way.
Some things have to be go into habit, no doubt about
Right.
it.
And so
That is a part of conditioning process.
Exactly. So there is without this conditioning process of good habits, how do we do that?
Definitely.
Right. And for somebody who is aware every moment, you don't need the conditioning habit.
The issue is that's not sufficient. It's necessary
Yes.
for a small child.
Right.
Because when a child is small, he may not be able to really
Right.
see
So,
through everything. But as he grows up,
Yes.
it's very, very important
Right.
that he should be able to see the reason of it. Otherwise, if he doesn't see, especially in the modern times,
Yes.
people, there's such a great awareness,
Right.
such a great rationality in the air,
Right.
so to say,
Right.
that unless the child is able to rationally understand it,
Yes.
understand the meaning of what gives me happiness, and by his own understanding, then you can, this reflection process, what makes me happy, I reflect. A child will know easily. When somebody shouts at you, do you get happy or not? It's not a simple thing. If somebody abuses you, you get happy or not?
I have this tendency to play devil's advocate always, and which
No, it's
is
very
that
good.
whatever the prevalent thing is, I will try to take the opposite position of it, just to have. So what I realize is, if I go there will be people to whom they will not even be talking about reason. Everything is done by tradition. Everything is jaise hota aaya hai, and then you sort of make a case for reason. What I see is, on the other hand, all of us, we look at everything as something that can be reasoned out, without realizing that our habit to reason out is a habit which was inculcated, and that is why I sort of mentioned it's very important to.
Let me make one point
Yeah.
which may be pertinent to this. I think that one word reflection that you used has a very deep implication here. When you ask the question, a child, even if you teach him or he intuitively understands that he has to have compassion and do things, then, and because he cannot be thoughtful at all times or mindful at all times, how will that play? Unless there is some habit, right? From whatever limited understanding I have of this topic and from personal experiences of my own self and my kids as I see them growing, reflection is a very powerful phenomenon. You don't need to form that habit externally as a parent, as a friend, as a colleague by telling them to do that. If the person has the capability of reflection, he may not be thoughtful or mindful all the time. Therefore, he may react or respond in a manner which is not thoughtful, but the power of reflection later will make him realize that there was a better way of doing it, and over a period of time, those reflections will automatically develop that habit. So, what I'm saying is, it need not be an external
And nowhere
induced
am I
habit
saying that it has to be induced. I
or
am saying,
sanskar,
yes,
as you were
yeah,
referring to it.
right.
It may actually be again based on reflection and rationalization.
And this is the development of sanskar, not imposed. So the word is not whether it is external or not. The
What I'm
point
saying is that habit
yes.
may be very intrinsic.
Yes.
It may develop on its own just because you had the power of reflection.
Yes, but the word habit and the word practice are deeply interlinked. They are, it's, practice is a habit. And so, and absolutely, I'm not at all suggesting that you have to do it externally. The point is, it has to happen. Because otherwise, and this is for, I would say, lesser mortals, somebody who doesn't, who is aware all the time, every moment. Yeah.
You see, we should be very clear that nobody can be aware all the time. That's very,
Okay.
very simple.
So, but I feel maybe there are some people. So,
Maybe arahants can be, not anything less than arahant impossible. Yes. You'll be surprised that Buddha is asked a question that I'm just reminded. You say, people say that Buddha is supposed to be omniscient, so you know everything every time. He says, no. But if I apply myself, then I can know. But it's not that I know everything all the time. So let's be humble enough to understand that it's not possible. So the issue main is what habit should we develop? Now my understanding over the years has developed, you develop the habit of reflection. Everything else. Nothing else. So when a child does a wrong thing, he'll suffer and cry and weep, you tell him okay. Don't shout at him, tell him okay. You find out why are you crying? What is the reason? And help him to reflect. And if we can help a child to reflect, that is the greatest gift we can give to a child. So then he'll automatically find out. Life is there. He's a conscious entity, he'll automatically find out what is right, what is wrong, what's not good, what's not bad. And that will be with his knowledge, that will be his discovery. And that will be always with him.
So for reflection, do we need the tools of a value system? Like reflection is like can take us to various directions. For some people, it's okay to do a certain thing. Okay, I mean, one practice is okay by somebody out of reflection, it helps him or her move towards that direction. But for somebody else's value system, it could be a different direction. Or are we talking about something universal that
reflection, you see, the basis of reflection is this action, whatever, that if you read that discourse, let me repeat, he says, when you are planning to do an action, when you are about to do an action, when you are doing an action, or when you have done an action. And at any stage, obviously, first is better, second is even good, third is at least better than not doing anything. What he is trying to say? You should see whether this action I have done was for my good, let's say past, which is the usual thing which is going to happen with most children. Whatever action I did, was it for my good? Did it give me happiness? Did it give me satisfaction? Or was it did it harm anything? In fact, doesn't say good, he says harm. Did it harm me? Did it harm anybody else? So this is a boy, the child can find out beyond a certain age. 7, 8-year-old child can find out. What harms me? What do I like? Do I like being abused or do I like being given good words? So that's a universal thing. There's no issue of value. No child will tell you that I like to be abused. And no child will tell you that I like to be stolen or deceived. No child will tell that I like that somebody should steal my things. So same thing is true of others. So we build up the whole process of reflection means you reflect with respect to your own experience. This is what is true of good meditators also. This is what is true of a small child also.
But sir, if you think of when kids grow up a little bit more, or even for us, there is an implicit value system that we are not aware of. For example, what is the importance of Buddha's words? If Buddha said, "Find out everything yourself," we discussed this, right? So Buddha's words form the implicit underlying value system, which we are not maybe conscious of.
No, they're not a value system, they're a faith.
Okay, so let me. So
there's no doubt about it.
So to begin
there's
with,
an implicit faith.
to begin with, yes.
So children are going to have a faith in their parent.
Right, exactly.
Every child has a faith in
which
the
is
parent.
what becomes the basis of reflection.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The first starting point has to be faith. There's no way. I mean, howsoever we may dispel and say we don't want to believe, it's impossible.
So without saying, for example, that cigarette smoking is bad, if a father smokes,
The
it
matter ends.
reflects, the matter ends. Right?
Finish. If I smoke and I tell my child smoking is bad,
Exactly.
the matter is ended. it has actually given rise to hypocrisy. Child will think that people are hypocrites, or I should be hypocrite like that. Then the whole thing falls flat, of course.
Exactly.
not
also
possible.
talking about value system, as in like what you mentioned about what Buddha said about how reflection should be done. On basis of that, I've like kind of okay, there's still a bit of a hazy picture to your mind about values. Like there's certain core universal values, like abuse is wrong, it hurts everybody. Those are like certain humanistic values, I would say. But there are also these values around
They
culture,
are changing.
tradition.
Then, of course, values. You see, when we talk of basic values, we mean the essence, the Panchshilas, for example. Stealing, hurting others, or trying to deceive others, or trying to take intoxicants. These are basic things which nobody will really dispute about. Being honest, isn't it? Of course, whether I should dress in this way or that way, food, eat this food or that food, they're all cultural values. We're talking of basic, core, essential human values. Cultural values will change with different places, different people, different environments. Dress will be different. The way of eating will be different. The festivals will be different. It's natural. Different people, even in our country, different parts of the country have different ways of dressing, different ways of eating, different festivals, different way of relating to festivals. So those things, as long as the basic value of not hurting others is kept in mind, everything is fine with the diversity. The moment we forget this basic value, that whatever I am doing or thinking or saying, is it hurting others? If you forget this, then all the kind of problems happen. Whatever we see strife in the society, whether it is on basis of caste or religion or anything, it is basically because we have forgotten this part. So if we just remember this simple thing, that any action of mine should not hurt others. Just as I don't want anybody's action to hurt me. So very simple way we can really understand the whole issue of reflection. And of course, this is the basic reflection from the perspective of values. When you talk of reflection from the point of Dhamma, then you go into understanding the nature of reality, which is much deeper. Understanding the nature of reality. And from our own experience, we are meditating and seeing things and then reflecting periodically. That is the key thing which actually is missed out in most meditators. You do meditation in a mechanical manner, no reflection, and it doesn't really seep into the being. It doesn't become something which is integral. So that doesn't become gelled with the day-to-day life. So that's the importance. So that's the very whole purpose of all this sutta study was, to see how to do proper reflection.
So on this hypocrisy with the children, so one of the greatest difficulty is to convey the message that being angry is bad, because you invariably are angry at home, and especially with the children, because when they do something wrong, you have to kind of be angry and tell them that this is wrong. So the first thing that comes is that if you go and tell them anytime that being angry is wrong, they will say, whether they say it or not, but they see you being angry with them, and they say internally they will say, this is hypocrisy. सारा दिन तो मुझे डांटते रहते हो और बोलते हो गुस्सा नहीं करना चाहिए. And you, because you are not perfect, then you can tell them that हाँ मैं भी realize करता हूँ कि गुस्सा नहीं करना चाहिए, but कभी कभी हो जाता है, तुम्हें भी नहीं करना चाहिए.
तो इफेक्ट नहीं होगा अगली बार एंगर का.
नहीं, but कोई वे आउट नहीं है.
और इसीलिए सब दुनिया चल रही है और सब अनंत नहीं बन रहे हैं.
नहीं तो संसार खत्म हो जाएगा.
So, but can I just add? So, if you remember, I had done an experiment specifically for this. I mean, anger has been sort of a continuous theme for me. So the experiment I did, as you would recall, with my elder one was, rather than being angry at him,
You would not eat.
I would take the satyagraha. So fast and tell him that I am doing this because there is something wrong in the way I am bringing him up. That's why he's doing it. So it worked. Actually, it worked for a while. I discontinued it, one because it was becoming impractical. I could not actually be fasting every second night. And second, it didn't happen, but I kind of saw it coming that the effect of it will wean off after a while.
Diminishing returns.
He'll feel less guilty after a while and probably not. So before the effect went out, I decided to pull out and call it a successful experiment.
That is why Kejriwal ki fast figure.
But you
Yeah,
also
so-
said that one of the contribution was that your wife started to tell the children that see, because of
Yeah,
you,
yeah.
your father is not eating.
So so what happened was I wanted him to realize on his own and not sort of also add an element of anger or guilt to it from my side. But my wife obviously was upset seeing me doing what I was doing, so she scolded him. And I think that basically made me realize that doing this at home is not that practical.
Because instead of your being angry, I think.
She
So it's settled the conservation of anger.
But sir, Sketch, I want to come back
Let's
to.
not take it personally. गुस्सा हो गया वो.
Right. So, yeah.
So we allow children also the liberty of getting angry. That's all. But we draw their attention to the
अब
consequences
बच्चे
later.
तो
Later.
गुस्सा तो आएगा उनको भी. हमने तो अपनी बचपन बिता दिया, कैसे बिताया पता नहीं. तो हम एक एक को समय समय पर समझाना
The way is that let them express it and then reflect on it. And then they let them realize that anger is not good, rather than our telling it.
And what might help is the fact that to admit in front of them that you also are prone to anger, and that you are trying to actually, you think it's a problem and you are trying to actually improve on it. So they know that there is no hypocrisy here. You are applying to yourself what you are applying to them. At least my elder one knows very well
I'll
that.
put the tea.
So